to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. In accordance with requirements of open meeting law, please be advised this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over Lunenburg Public Access for everyone to see. I'd like to start off the meeting to see if there's any public comment for anything that we're not covering on the agenda this evening. As I don't see any public comment, we'll go on to our first item of business. We have an A&R plan for 205 Sunset Lane. Unfortunately, I need to recuse myself from this, which leaves our board shorthanded to cover this item. So I guess we're going to...
So the applicant is asked to continue.
So
we'll come back next week. As it's not a hearing, there's no continuance necessary.
Okay. So I apologize for 205 Sunset Lane on that A&R, but hopefully we'll have a full staff next week. So next is public hearing. The May 2019 town warrant article, recreational marijuana. Is this a continuation or is it new?
New.
So I got to read this then.
And this is a hearing for 7 warrant articles, 6 prohibition articles, and 1 regulation article.
Okay. So the Lunenburg Planning Board will hold a public hearing on February 25th, 2019, 6:35 p.m. Joseph Bellata Meeting Room, Town Hall, 17 Main Street, Lunenburg, Mass. 01462, to make alterations to the Code of the Town of Lunenburg, Mass. Chapter 250 zoning, Article 441G use table by adding non-medical marijuana uses. 2, adding 4.1.0 non-medical marijuana uses. 3, delete 4.15, temporary moratorium on sale and distribution of recreational marijuana. 5, create new 4.15 non-medical marijuana establishments. Copies are in file in the planning office, 960 Mass Ave, Lunenburg, Mass.
So,
So you want to give us a synopsis?
yeah, I'll give you the rundown. There is a 7-page article that covers regulation of all 6 potential marijuana establishment types. They are marijuana cultivator, marijuana product manufacturer, marijuana testing facility, marijuana retailer, marijuana transporter, and marijuana researcher. Additionally, there are 6 articles, one individually for each of those types of uses, for a prohibition of that use. Those will be mirrored on the ballot as ballot questions, individual to each product type. I think what I would like for the board to do, or I request that the board does, is get public input tonight. About an hour and a half ago, I got town council's comments, so I don't have paper copies of those for the board. The board has committed to 2 nights of this public hearing, so I plan to distribute those to the board tomorrow. I also have a few questions, minor comments from the building commissioner that after we take public comment, we can discuss. And depending on input from the public, input from the board, and sort of the discussion of the building inspector's questions or comments, which the way that I see them are sort of point for discussion, I can propose some alterations or changes in conjunction with things that town council has said to be discussed at the second night of the hearing, which would be next week, Monday, March 4th.
Are the town council recommendations significant enough that it would potentially impact public comment?
I don't believe so. Again, they're more clarification comments. I only read them briefly because I was doing a couple of other things. It seems that she's asking, oh, well, what about this, or adding a comma here, or adding as amended there, or changing a citation to just make it a little clearer, but I don't believe that they're substantial.
Is the intent tonight to have public comment and not to have public comment on at the following meeting?
I would leave that to the board. I don't think that would make the most sense. I think that if you got the bulk of public comment tonight, there would obviously be a need for public comment based on potential changes
Okay.
or alterations.
Okay.
But again, I think that having done these for a number of years, you hear public comment, the board agrees, disagrees, changes perception, wants to alter something. So I think that making those changes in conjunction with some of the stuff that town council is talking about presents a more holistic
Okay.
final draft that can then have a more robust discussion on the second night, rather than getting into the weeds of a minor technicality here and there, and then having someone make a more omnibus comment that maybe strikes that section or completely alters what the board wants to do with that section.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we do allow public comment at the next meeting, because I've heard from a number of people, because of the power outages in town, that they weren't able to attend the meeting. So I want to make sure we offer an opportunity for additional public comment.
Yeah, and that's wholly up to the board
Okay.
and the chair at the time, and I'm not making a recommendation one way or the other about public comment, more just the path that we follow to get to a final bylaw that the board votes on for submission.
Okay. Do we have a copy of the building inspector's comments? Because I'm not seeing that.
You don't. I have a couple of like jotting notes that
Okay.
are on my copy.
Okay.
So, yeah, we can jump right into public comment here, but
Would you like me to
it might make
run
sense
through the
to-
regulation?
Yeah, run through the understanding of
Sure.
why there's so many questions.
Mr.
and-
Chairman.
and how they're segregated.
Before we do that, I think it's important to talk about the prohibition articles and the board's rationale for putting those articles on, and how this will work in conjunction with the regulations if the
Sure.
prohibition doesn't pass. So maybe if you could talk
Right,
about
that's
that a
what I
little
meant
bit.
by
So
breaking it up.
why don't I start with the regulation article, and then talk about how the prohibition would play with that and why the board chose to do both?
Okay.
So there are some copies on the front table here if you're interested in following along in the audience. And if you're at home, you can go to the planning board webpage, and this is also available, so you can follow along at home. So the page 1 of the regulation article will be alterations to 4.1, and it will add 4.10. Excuse me, that's letter, not number. And it adds a section to the use table which outlines the 6 different types of marijuana establishments. And it will add 4.10 to the definition of uses, which then defines those individual uses. And then we'll go to page 2, and page 2 to 7, you'll note are denoted as 250, 415, bless you.
Thank you.
And so this section of the bylaw will replace the recreational or non-medical marijuana moratorium. There's a fair amount of detail in here. Bless you.
Bless you
Thank
again.
you.
The bylaw is to regulate non-medical marijuana establishments in a way that provides for the least impactful location to the health and safety of the residents of Lunenburg and the town in general, as the planning board sees fit at this point in time. All marijuana establishments will require a special permit. They will be required to have held their community meeting, which is a requirement of the licensing process through the Cannabis Control Commission. They'll be required to have signed a host community agreement with the Board of Selectmen, which is also a requirement of the licensing structure of the Cannabis Control Commission. And they'll be required to have filed and received provisional licensure from the Cannabis Control Commission prior to seeking a special permit through the town of Lunenburg. What the provisional license is essentially they have filed all the necessary paperwork, gone through the required background checks, corporate review, and have posted the required fiduciary surety with the Cannabis Control Commission to prove that if they were permitted locally, that they could operate their establishment under the regulations of the Cannabis Control Commission. They would come to the community. The town would go through the special permitting process, much as it does with any other special permit. They would issue or deny the special permit. If they deny it, I would expect that the Cannabis Control Commission would give the applicant the opportunity to find a new location, either in Lunenburg or elsewhere, and go through the steps to get to the provisional licensure again. If they're approved, then they begin their alterations in construction. They go back to the Cannabis Control Commission. When they're complete, they get their final license. The Cannabis Control Commission does an inspection and gives them their authorization to operate, and they have so many days, it's somewhere between 3 and 10 to open up doors and commence operations. So this process comes sort of in the middle. So once a special permit is approved, you're probably not going to see any marijuana establishment open for several months, if not more, depending on the location, the construction required, and all of those type of things. There are provisions in here that require 500-foot setbacks from all pre-existing public or private schools from kindergarten to 12th grade, all pre-existing small and large group childcare as permitted by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and 250-foot setbacks from family childcare facilities. This would be people providing childcare in their home, as well as houses of worship, funeral homes, and municipal active recreation facilities. That would be ball fields, parks, things where people are going to conduct or participate in an activity. It wouldn't include something like a conservation area or a trail where on any given day there aren't groups of people. It tends to be a lower volume use, and the people are kind of conducting activities on their own. There's provisions for not consuming marijuana at the establishments. There's conditions that require the marijuana establishment to not create a nuisance in the parking lot through excessive traffic, excessive noise, excessive police calls, those kind of fun things that get covered. They are required to allow for inspection and record keeping without notice, which is also done by the Cannabis Control Commission, but we've put a provision in to allow it locally. Requirements for bonding for if an establishment were to close, to provide funds to the town should the establishment operators not remove any product or equipment that is left on site. There are specific setbacks for establishments within certain districts from residential properties. So before I get into that, what I will say is, or what I'll do is go through marijuana cultivators. This is people who are growing marijuana. Marijuana cultivators are allowed to purchase marijuana for promulgation, so they're purchasing live plants or seeds. They're allowed to cultivate, process, and package. Now, processing, as I understand it for cultivators, is taking the raw plant and turning it into a consumable plant. There's some picking, some drying, some trimming involved. This isn't turning it into things like food or oils or other things. It's only taking the plant from its raw form and turning it into a sellable form, and packaging would be putting that into some sort of packaging. They are not allowed to sell direct to consumers, and they are allowed only to sell to other marijuana establishments. Those establishments are proposed to be allowed in Residential A, Residential B, Outlying, and the Office Park Industrial. Within those districts, they're required in the RA, RB, and Outlying to be 375 feet from the establishment's closest structural element to a residential property line, whether it's a residential zoning district or a pre-existing residential use. In the Office Park Industrial, it's a 250-foot setback from the same criteria, marijuana establishment structure, to a residential property line or pre-existing residential use. A marijuana product manufacturer, this is someone who takes the raw plant from a cultivator and they turn it into something: soda, candy, oil, butter, lotion, those sorts of things. They are only allowed in the industrial district, the Office Park Industrial. They are required to be 250 feet from the closest structural element of the establishment to a residential property line, whether it's a residential zoning district or a pre-existing residential use. Marijuana testing facilities, these are quality control laboratories. They work independently, but under the guidance of the Cannabis Control Commission. They test marijuana products, whether it's the actual plant or the products derived from marijuana product manufacturers, to ensure that they are free of pesticides and other things that aren't safe for human consumption. They are only allowed in the Office Park Industrial, and they are required to be 250 feet from any residential zoning district line or pre-existing residential use. Marijuana retailer, this is obviously the store where you go and buy marijuana. They are proposed to be allowed in the commercial district, the Office Park Industrial District, and the Summer Street Overlay District, which is underlying comprised of commercial and industrial zoning districts. In all of those districts, they are required to be 250 feet from an a pre-existing residential use or from any lot line in a residential district. Marijuana transporter, this would be like Brinks for Money. It's somebody who doesn't have any part in any other marijuana establishment, but they transport marijuana from one establishment to the other. They are only allowed in the Office Park Industrial, and they have a 250-foot setback from any pre-existing residential or any lot in a residential zoning district. And a marijuana researcher, so this would be somebody who can grow, process, or otherwise obtain marijuana for the purposes of academic research. This would be university laboratories, people conducting scientific research in the field of marijuana, whether it's in plant genetics or the uses for marijuana and how they may be helpful or harmful. Those are only allowed within the Office Park Industrial District, and again, 250-foot setback from pre-existing residential uses or lots within a residential zoning district.
Just to clarify, that research can be any type of research, not just academic research.
Correct. I mean, it tends to...
It's commercial.
Yeah, commercial, drug manufacturers, those kind of things.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's... I don't want to kind of get into the weeds of the bylaw. I think I got more into the weeds than
You did.
a lot of people would have liked, but I think it sets a platform for some of the discussion. And so based on that, that's what the regulation would look like. The planning board over their 18 to 24 months of looking at this has got a very unclear picture of whether there's a majority support or opposition for the location of these marijuana establishments within the community. So they felt it was imperative to put forward a series of articles that both regulate the establishments as well as a series of articles that prohibit it. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 6 articles, one for each type of marijuana establishment, that would allow for it to be prohibited. Because we were a yes community, the town of Lunenburg, in 2016, on the statewide referendum, we're required to pass prohibition articles at town meeting and by local ballot initiative. So the planning board is advocating that all 7 marijuana establishment bylaws be passed at town meeting to allow for the voters at the ballot in May to choose which establishments they would willingly permit through the ballot vote. If all of those ballot votes passed by 51% or larger, they would all be prohibited. Ultimately, it's more likely we would end up with some sort of a la carte prohibition where 1 or 2 or 3 gets prohibited and the remainder are permitted. I think what the planning board looked at originally was an omnibus prohibition that would prohibit all forms of marijuana establishments, and they felt that that was a risky proposal that would likely fail because some people would feel that things like cultivation or testing laboratories were acceptable, whereas they may feel that retail or processing is something that they wouldn't want to deal with. So the board took the tact that allowing for the individual articles gives people more power to have a voice in what they feel would be appropriate within the community. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it well. But just to clarify, the 6 articles that prohibit overlap with all of the rules and regulations in the
Correct.
bylaw. So anything that, if anything did get prohibited, then we just remove that piece.
In the fall.
From the bylaw, and the use table gets updated accordingly, where it wouldn't be allowed, because it wouldn't be in the use table. So we tried to cover both cases, and we got a lot of input on a lot of different pieces, and had many long discussions. And I think what we've come up with is a proposed bylaw that I think is going to meet the needs of the town and as accurately as possible reflect the desire of the community. And so with that, I'll open this up for public comment so that we can see how close or how far we may be with regards to your own opinion of the bylaw.
Chairman?
Yes?
Come to the mic.
Yes.
Come up to the
Yeah,
mic.
come to the mic. State your name and address, please, for the record.
My name is Dave Rogers. I live at 82 Highland Street in Lunenburg. Before I go too far into this, and it's going to be brief, I'd like a clarification if I could, Adam.
Sure.
I thought I heard you say that it's the position of the board to bring these articles to town meeting and to pass them,
Correct, to pass all 7 articles.
so people will vote affirmatively?
So yes, so that,
Why would we want to do that?
I was just going to say, I don't think we want to pass all 7 articles. You mean at town meeting?
correct.
Okay,
At town
okay.
meeting, because town meeting is the first Saturday in May. The election is the third Saturday in May.
Got it.
So if, let's say the regulations fail, and all 6 prohibition articles pass and are approved by the voters at town meeting, and none of those prohibition articles pass at the ballot, they all fail at the ballot, so then we would have no regulation of marijuana establishments, and they would be allowed by the closest zoning use in our current zoning table. So the way that the statute was written, 94, Mass General Law 94G, which covers non-medical marijuana, you cannot use the exemption, or currently, if you don't have a use in your zoning table, it's prohibited. There's one current use that's exempt from that, and that's adult uses. So you'll notice if you go to almost any town in Massachusetts, there's an adult use section in their bylaw that defines them and zones them to a specific place. 94G adds marijuana establishments into that same category. So silence in your bylaw on marijuana establishments does not prohibit them. It kicks them to the closest current zoning definition that you have. So retail would be allowed anywhere that retail is allowed if we don't have regulation. So the planning board's position is to pass the regulation, pass the 6 prohibition articles, and then the ballot would determine what establishments would be permitted.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Just,
Go ahead.
I'd personally like to stress, I think the most important thing is that we pass the regulation at town meeting. If some of the prohibition questions do not pass at town meeting, then the election ballot becomes a moot point.
Right.
Because it has to pass at both locations. So if the town feels very strongly against prohibition and shows up in droves at town meeting to vote down all the prohibition articles, then the vote, it becomes a moot point. There will be no prohibition. However, if the town feels the other way and they're all in favor of prohibition, we can't have a situation where they only vote forward on the prohibition articles and not on the regulation, because then we could be left in a very bad position if a prohibition doesn't pass at the election. So, again, the bylaw itself is the most important thing for us to pass at town meeting. And then the prohibition articles pass or not pass depending upon what the town wants to do. And that's why we wanted to put that choice in the town's hand.
Okay. That's a very, very important distinction. Very important.
Right.
And I thank you for the clarification, because that sets the stage.
And I also want to add one more sort of note to that is, if all the prohibition were to fail and the regulation were to pass, it's not a guarantee that any marijuana establishment would be located in town ever. Only because, A, people need to want to come and want to do it. They need to be able to find a parcel that they can acquire to do so. And then they have all the steps of licensing through the Cannabis Control Commission that they need to go, including the host community agreement with the selectmen. So you get into a space where there are other bodies in town that have impact on how this gets carried out that we here don't have any control over.
Okay, thank you. Oftentimes, when we talk about 250 or 275 feet from the nearest residential dwelling unit or zone, whatever the verbiage is, it's difficult for us to really comprehend that. I want to give you a case in point. I live at 82 Highland Street. Adjacent to our residence, there was a chicken farm, an egg farm, Hayno's Egg Farm. Okay, it goes way the heck back, and they could put a facility in the back of that property because of the frontage and all that kind of stuff and setback. So I think it's important when people look at these things that they really understand what that means. And I think that you said it would be permissible in a Residence A, a Residence B, and so forth and so on. So I just offer that up, and to make sure that people are informed and take the time to really understand what this could mean to them and their neighbors. Thank you very much for your time.
I specifically asked just to get an understanding of what does 250 feet look like, what does 375 feet look like, and Adam, you compared it to the length of a football field. So if you can kind of just explain that.
If we look at, you're required to have 700 feet in, you need a 700-foot square, essentially, to be able to put one of these. So that's 490,000 square feet of buffer.
10 acres.
Correct. So that's just the buffer. So in order to build a viable cultivation facility, you can't build more than 100,000 square feet of cultivation. So you're on a minimum of we'll say 12. Maybe 13-acre parcel.
Okay.
And that's provided that it is perfectly square and you can suitably put the building smack dab in the middle and meet all of the pertinent requirements for what you're trying to do on there. And I know that you've worked in property development, I know you've worked in banking. There's not a lot of parcels that large that are perfectly square and that don't have funny jigs and jogs and don't have abutters that encroach within certain areas. So within residential zones, you're going to be restricted to some of the larger parcels, and they're going to be cordoned into an area that has a significant distance between the property line. So we're not even talking to the residential structure. We're talking specifically to their own property line. So oftentimes you find large parcels surrounded by smaller parcels that have been cut off by A&R or some other. So you start to really shrink the area that someone can use some of those larger parcels. And sometimes you find multiple large parcels next to each other, and there's a house on one side or the other, and that house tends to be, towards the front of the parcel, and they want to put this in the back. They still are required to meet the 375 to their own property line. So you get into a situation where it may possibly, under the proposed bylaw, be within a residential area, but it's not going to be like someone sitting on their porch looking at the giant greenhouse just over the line, like someone might with a neighbor's chicken coop or their kids playing on the swing set or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. That it's far more restrictive than, and I understand, with the chicken farm, that's an agricultural use. It has exemption under 40A Section 3, and they're allowed to do a lot of different things that this doesn't have those sorts of protections.
Right. Thank you for that explanation, and I want to rescind what I said, because I don't think that that property has that much land that they would be able to do what they have to do. I was just keying in on the...
Yeah, and I understand.
back, but when you put it in that perspective, it's kind of, it's a different thing. So I rescind that, and I misspoke. Okay? But
Appreciate
it's the first time in 74 years. I mean, I just... Yeah. I just want to thank you for all your time, and this has been an enlightening discussion, and thank you.
So just a minor point of clarification, that acreage size that you quoted is only for a property that is surrounded by residential properties. If the property is bordered on one side by land that is not restricted under residential.
By a commercial or industrial parcel?
Or conservation land, which
No,
is
if it's in a residential zoning district. The board said
okay,
any
so
property
that's
within a
right. So it's
residential
still in
zoning
residential?
district.
Okay, but if it abuts industrial.
Correct.
Then I think it's more like 7 acre.
Yeah, and I think what would probably happen is most people would bias that towards the industrial because there's a smaller buffer and they have an easier
Correct.
time making that.
Which was the intent.
Correct.
Okay.
Good evening. Jim Levesque, 33 Lancaster Avenue. First of all, I wanted to commend the board for the diligence that you guys have put into this. I know that there was some pressure also for you to come up with a recommendation one way or another, and I think that you are taking the exact right tact in taking this to the voters and letting them decide which of these uses should be prohibited within the town. I did have a couple of comments. I think you did a great job in capturing what at least I heard in terms of public comment over the last several months, and what I've heard from you guys. There were a couple of things that I wanted some clarification on, and maybe some typos that needed to be addressed. So on page 3, number 2, all marijuana establishments shall be within a fully enclosed structure and not, I think should be
Yeah, it should say no.
should be changed. And no marijuana odor shall be detectable. What is the definition of marijuana odor in this instance? Is it, because plants have a natural odor?
It would be that natural odor. I mean, it's an indoor cultivation.
Okay,
So they have ways of filtering the
Odor.
exhaust
Right.
Yeah.
in order to remove that pungent marijuana odor.
okay. Because I know burning it smells different than growing it.
Growing it smells a lot like burning it. And I mean, it doesn't smell burnt. I've toured a facility, and it's a very distinct odor.
Yeah.
Okay,
And it's
It's very noticeable.
okay.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for some definition, clarity on that. That's fine. Number 8 and number 9. Number 9 looks like it should be a new paragraph.
it should. Yeah, that was there was a formatting error.
Page 4, number 14. Marijuana plants, products, accessories for the ingestion, inhalation, or... it sounds like there's an...
Or used to introduce marijuana to the human
or,
body.
anyway, okay, or used to introduce... Okay, I thought there was another method there. And then on page 5, number 2, you have cease and desist order twice. Just really minor stuff. Everything else, I thought you captured, as I said, the intent and comments from the public very well.
Oh, yeah.
So, thank you.
Number 2.
Fifth line of number
Jeez, I
2.
read this and I usually pick up stuff like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Additional public comment? Oh, come on, we did that good.
Good evening, Tom Alonso, 284 Lancaster Avenue. Just have one question. I used to bring this up a lot when, as a selectman, we were brought with alcohol licenses, and I always kind of was puzzled by the whole idea of limiting alcohol licenses in the town if it was legal, and it has incredible restrictions on it already. I see on page 5, under 250-4-15.h, number 1, beside defining something that can only exist on 7-acre or 10-acre parcels,
This is only retail.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
And those probably are year down around 5 acres.
Okay, so 5 acres. So it's an enormous thing for any retail. I mean, look at any other retail in town, aside from big stores. To limit it by 2 seems to be, again, just an arbitrary number that, to me, has no logic behind it, whether you agree or not. I mean, if it passes and the town decides that it's legal to have a marijuana retailer, I don't understand the restriction on 2. What are we? There's incredible hurdles in the Cannabis Commission, in the town, in the size area, in the zoning already, and I don't think we should be playing. We should let the market decide whether they could support more than 1 or 2.
There is a provision in 94G that allows for communities to limit the number of marijuana retailers to up to 20% or greater of the off-premise package licenses that it's issued. You can actually limit it to whatever you want. Because we were a yes community, limiting it to less than 20% would require ballot vote. So we have 8 off-premise licenses, so 2 is like 27.5%.
I don't question the authority.
No,
I'm not
no,
saying
and
you're not authorized to do it.
the board talked about it, and they felt that limiting it from the outset was an approach that they wanted to take to prevent being overrun or inundated. And it's, a bylaw. They can change it in the future if the market seems to dictate it and the town seems to find it acceptable. I certainly don't want to speak for the board. I do know that Fitchburg has permitted at least 4
Right, so the
retail
chance of us getting
establishments.
overrun, probably minimal.
I would have thought that 2 years ago, and I'm not so sure now. A lot of communities have taken advantage of their ability to do this. It is a new industry. There is a lot of big money in it coming from other states and even internationally. So even with all those hurdles, there isn't always enough of a hurdle to prevent multiple people. And I think being located where we are with the reputation that we have, sometimes our zip code can be a clear and present indicator that someone wants to locate there for the cachet of being in this area but not being in Leominster, not being in Fitchburg. I'm in Lunenburg. We have this boutique marijuana store, and hoping that zip code will attract more people. And if one person is successful, there's the opportunity for others to grow on that. And I think the board is taking a conservative approach.
You think 01462 is some 90210? Really?
I don't know that it's necessarily
Seriously?
90210, but I
mean,
think
I think you're building, in my mind, I think you're building a real mythical narrative to
Perhaps.
something that two cities are already going to be licensing for, and eventually all towns will. I just think it's an arbitrary number to basically falsely restrict what would be something that should be given to the free market. If it's going to be legal, then there shouldn't be, you don't limit how many lottery places we have. We have people, you can buy lotteries anywhere here. In the alcohol one, I think is ridiculously, it's a ridiculous notion too, because there's all these restrictions and there's all these things you have to do to even have the license in the first place. So to me, again, having someone who doesn't use this stuff, I'm just saying from a process point of view and from a logic point of view, if you're going to ask the people should make it legal, I think also putting in a regulation that limits it to 2 just seems like, finger in the air kind of thing. It doesn't seem like it's based in any kind of logic.
I will tell you, I had questions regarding this particular section, and I would prefer to see a percentage versus of the licenses versus a specific number. But my rationale for wanting it is because other communities that have adopted it are seeing problems, particularly with odor, and that's why we talked a lot about the odor. Framingham has some establishments, they're
You have
seeing
a-
issues with odor, but that doesn't mean they had restrictions as well, but we're trying to make it as clear as we can, but we don't know what we're getting into. The reality is that this is an unknown market. Communities have dealt with parking issues. They've dealt with, I'm sorry, with what?
Traffic issues.
Severe traffic issues. They've dealt with odor issues. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but personally, as a member of the planning board, I would like to start slowly, and in the event that we have 2 retail establishments, we're looking at potentially 2 town meetings, we have the opportunity to change it. So to me, it wasn't an arbitrary number because it's based on the general law and the percentage of alcohol licenses that we have. And particularly with retail, I think we have to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences.
The percentage of the alcohol license is in and of itself an arbitrary number. They just say, oh, you know what, again, let's say 20%. So, again, I don't think it makes any sense in it as far as it goes. I mean, obviously, the board's going to do what the board's going to do. I just might comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Katie Adams, Williams Drive, and I just wanted to thank you for leaving a path for prohibition open. You know, I think there was a little bit of work that needed to be done, that path still exists, and I'm thankful for that. And I'm just adding to the conversation that I am against the commercialization of substance use. And so for people who support prohibition, I think it has a lot to do with sort of the concerns with commercialization of substance use in town. And just to speak to the idea of having the 2 stores in there, I think with anything, start low, go slow. A lot harder to go backwards and take away facilities than it is to add. If we are all really excited about all the drug use in town, then we can add to it. But at least if it's not going smooth, we've limited it to 2. And hopefully prohibition will pass and we won't have to worry about the amount. Thanks.
Just to be clear, I want to reiterate what Mr. Chenis and Adam Birney said, is that it's important that we have the regulations in place, because in the event prohibition doesn't pass in both town meeting and the ballot, we will be left with no regulations. So.
Any other public comment? Please.
Wow.
Okay, so,
We'll continue this hearing?
yeah, we move that
Yeah.
I accept a motion to continue it to, what's the date?
March 4th.
March 4th.
I would make a motion to continue this public hearing to March 4th at 6:35 PM in the town hall.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I'll get the building inspector and town council's comments out to you.
Okay.
There is a typo on, the question 3 should be question 3, not question 1 again.
Yes, you're right, it should.
So thank you very much for the public input on that.
No, I think we just had public comment.
Public comment. Our next, I'm sorry?
I'm just, nothing.
Oh. Our next item is 190 Electric Ave, continuation from 2/11/19.
Good evening. My name's Josh Farkas with Borrego Solar. Brandon Smith is with me, also with Borrego Solar. So I thought what I would do is just give a recap of what's happened since our last meeting a couple weeks back, and then talk about the new plans that we submitted. So we conducted a site visit at 190 Electric Ave on February 16th. It was a Saturday. I know a couple members from the board, some of the conservation members, town selectmen were there. In addition with the McAuliffe, Brian McAuliffe, who's the one abutter who we've been communicating with as we've been talking through the permitting process. We had a chance to basically give kind of a tour of the layout of where the proposed system would be. And we spent quite a bit of time walking in the northeast corner of the system, of the proposed system, where the tree clearing, I guess, discussion's been occurring. So we got to put our boots on the ground and have our eyes kind of pointing at some areas and checking out elevation and distances from wetlands and things, and from property lines. So I felt like we accomplished a lot there. Brandon and I, our takeaway from that day was that we wanted to amend our plans for, basically, we're talking about a section that's from the 100-foot line to the 200-foot line, highlighted in the, right there in the red orangish color. So we were initially proposing to clear all those trees in there. And I think what we've learned through the site walk and through talking specifically with the abutter and the board members is that what we could do in there is basically propose a selective cut, where any tree that would be above 25 feet in height would come down. These are in the plans that we sent, just to have the detail. So we were proposing to clear trees above 25 feet and to replace them at a 2-to-1 ratio with new plantings at 6 feet. So if for every tree over 25 that comes down, we'd have 2 new trees that we would propose to plant somewhere in that area, or maybe even closer to the abutter's property, wherever works best. One of the interesting parts about that section is that as it slopes down toward the array, you actually can accomplish more by placing any plantings further up the hill, which would be closer to the residences. It's felt like that's probably the solution that we should lean toward, but what we'd want to propose in amending our plans is that we'd identify it as a selective cut zone. We would go out there as some sort of a condition put on a special permit that we would do a site walk, whether it's with the planning board or the building department, with abutters that maybe have become part of this process or who may become between now and then. And we'd basically identify the trees, we'd take a count, and then we'd work to come up with a plan of where to put those replacement trees on the property. So we felt like that could accomplish quite a lot. It allows us to not have shade from the really high trees that are up gradient of our system. So that would accomplish something huge. Obviously, it would take care of the screening concerns that we have. And then it would also, one of the other ideas, wasn't our idea, but one of the other ideas that we came up with was to move the fence a little bit further up the hill as well. If you place a 7-foot fence 5 or 10 feet higher, from up above, the sight line would be blocked even more adequately. So we think with the raised fence line, selective cut, new plantings, and kind of combining all that together, plus working with the folks on Electric Ave to specifically call out, hey, this little area right here could use more plantings than maybe that area. And one of the things we came to realize is that, a 40 or 50-foot tree in one spot might not be able to screen as well as 2 or 3 or 4 smaller trees strategically placed. So we just wanted to it's a little bit of a juggling act, but we thought that would be the best way to handle it. We also responded through the peer review comments. There's a couple small open items that I think we can definitely get taken care of, and we'll be back here next Monday. But looking forward to talking through what I just kind of ran you through and going from there.
I appreciate the changes that you've made, and after doing the site walk, and I think that from visually seeing the site, I think that the selective cut absolutely makes sense. I think moving the fence makes sense, and I think that the impact to the abutters can really be mitigated. And after seeing the topography of the site, I think it is going to be fairly well screened from any abutter. So I appreciate your working with us and trying to minimize that impact. I'm wondering where you are with the other boards, with conservation specifically.
Sure. So we were in last week for our first hearing with conservation. Brandon was he ran that meeting. I'll let him talk through that one for you.
Yeah. I met with the Conservation Commission last Wednesday, and they didn't have any significant concerns brought up. I think when we were out there, they understand that that wetland crossing area is already a crossing. There's timber mats that we'll be removing, cleaning up some of the site, and then they are familiar with the wetland replication area, and we're happy with that. So no issues came up at the meeting. They weren't able to vote on it because we're waiting on a DEC file number, but we're making progress with them.
Great.
So I just had a brief question. In the last meeting, There was a concern expressed on the southeast section, where there's still some trees being taken down that are closer to the properties than the 200 feet. And there was one resident that was expressing concern that it's great that you're putting the extra shading up above, but from where his property was, it was going to be still clear cut. Are you also offering to do
That's where
that?
they're talking about.
Oh, so it is in this area then, down here? I thought he said the orange area.
It is, that's this area here.
The-
The abutter was here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought his complaint was towards this
No,
direction.
this meets the 200. It was looking this way. And actually, we met
This-
with the abutter on the sidewalk.
Okay, so that's the area that he was concerned with? Oh, because my impression from watching the video was that he was concerned with this area.
Well, he's
seen
here,
down
so why
here.
don't we talk to him?
Okay. All right, so,
Mr. McAuliffe.
yeah, I guess we'll go through this, and then during public comment, we can get his input. So, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Was there any other questions from the board?
No, I just would like to hear from the abutter
All right,
as to what his
so,
thoughts.
so I'll open this up for public comment then for any of the abutters or anybody else that has a vested interest in this project.
Brian McAuliffe, Electric Ave. And after talking with Josh and going over everything, we agreed that that would be fine with us, what he's proposing. So,
Okay? Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other public comment for 190 Electric Ave? Okay,
Okay, I just have a question.
go ahead.
I heard that you're addressing some minor points. Do we need to continue this then?
Well, you do, there's only 4 people here tonight.
Okay.
Or there's only 3 people, and they need
Okay,
4
okay.
votes, so.
So we will have to continue this.
Correct.
There was also the Graves engineering response. There was still some open-ended items, if I recall correctly.
There was 1 or 2.
Right.
And I think some of them were housekeeping matters. And I think that's what they're talking about addressing. There was one about a
Number
potential turnaround.
Number 20 looked like it still had a concern with regards to the pipe diameter and the pipe slope.
Correct, and I
that
think
wasn't
that's what
addressed. Yeah,
he was
so-
talking about finalizing this week.
Most of the comments really are just like that item, the HydroCAD model, the stormwater model that we provided had the correct number. It was just a matter of, that call out on the plans needs to be updated. So the remaining items are mostly items like that we will, clean up for next meeting. But nothing substantial.
Yeah, and then there
remaining.
was the poll comments. Is that going to be addressed as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we will look at that, and we'll have a response letter that we'll send out. I guess maybe not prior to next Monday, but we'll send it to the board prior to the meeting. I know it might not be quite enough time to review, but we'll have a response.
And then there was the HydroCAD stuff you said you're also addressing? Okay. Was there anything else? I think that was it, right? Is there anything else on that? Yeah. All right, so short of not being able to move forward on this because of our attendance tonight, does the board have any other concerns with this project?
Nope.
Then I'd accept a motion for a continuation.
So moved?
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So continue to
March
For
4th.
March 4th.
6:35.
6:35.
March 4th,
Yes, 1 week from tonight.
6:35 PM.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. See you in a
Thank
couple,
you.
next week.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to comment, I've seen a lot of people come in. I just want to let people know that anyone that came specifically for the public hearing on the marijuana regulations, that hearing was continued to Monday night at 6:35 PM. So if you have comments, we'd urge you to attend Monday, March 4th.
Okay, I'd like to move on to 380-400 Electric Avenue. continued from 2/11/19.
Hello. Thank you. I'm Frank McPartland from Ducharme Dillis. Looking to continue the application for the Proctor development from last planning board meeting. Since we met previously, we had received and responded to the Graves Engineering peer review letter. And I received back a response letter from Jeff on Friday afternoon. Reading through it, the bulk of the comments looked to be addressed. And there were four minor items that I had sent him, basically red line comments, red line responses on the plan to address them. They were, for the most part, minor labeling issues. I had corrected on comment 34, I had corrected the spot shots to provide an accessible path grading at the handicapped accessible parking spaces. And then the only new comment was with regard to the MDC trap coming off of the floor drains at the proposed garage.
So,
Yes, sir.
I may be at a loss here, but, so you responded to the original Graves Engineering letter, and then he responded to that with an update, but I don't seem to have that
I don't have that
response
update either.
You do not have it?
that you are referencing.
So,
So did we not receive that? Because all I have is your response to his letter. I don't
Okay.
Yes, I
have
don't
his
see
response
his
to your
response.
response.
so-
okay,
That came in.
So
Late
we are
today.
That was-
missing material.
Yeah, so without that, it's very difficult to follow what's being said. Is it possible to make a copy this evening or not?
I don't have access, the door's locked. Unless I could go across the street.
do you need just access to a copier or to a,
Well, we don't, the copier is in the town manager's office.
okay.
So, I mean, in summary, it sounds like you're saying his response accepted the vast majority of your responses with a few
Can we
exceptions.
just see that for a moment?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Chairman, if you would assist, I'd be happy to take whatever you need to have copied, go out, get a copy, and come right back.
Graves response,
This
yeah,
is
that is the
Graves'
Graves
response.
response.
Glad you give me 10 bucks.
Do you want to take Dave up on his offer?
I would, without seeing it, it's
Yeah,
impossible to have this meeting.
if you wouldn't mind, that would be fantastic.
Yep, we're right back.
We just were not, we did not receive that material. So why don't we cover something other than that while he's getting the copies? and we'll come
Absolutely.
Back to that.
Yes.
Okay.
The plans, since we have met, the plans, the application received Concom approval as well as sewer approval, right there?
Yes.
Yes. So this is the last step that we have before the project is finalized.
So other than addressing the Graves comments, there's no other changes to the project?
So can we continue this until we,
Oh,
no, just until, or table it until we get the point? We can't really discuss it without that letter.
okay. Yeah, how do we do that? Like, continue it to
Just
like
you
a
can
future
recess.
time?
We can
Oh,
recess.
can
Can we
we just-
recess for this public hearing until Gene's back?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to recess 380 to 400 Electric Avenue until we get copies of the material, and we'll move on to our next agenda item to come back to this item. So item 5 is a board representative to the Open Space Ad Hoc Committee. I understand that you
I very much
volunteered.
would like to be on that.
Is that something we just need to vote on, or is it part of a reorganization? Or?
No, it would be part of a reorganization, but the board at the last meeting felt they wanted to hold reorganization until they either had a full membership or new membership, and where this is a subcommittee of the board, the ad hoc, and we have a member who's expressed interest, I think it's appropriate to appoint someone to it. Whereas the approval of the open space plan is coming in the near future, and there may be items that they wish to address.
Okay, well, I would accept a motion to appoint Paula to the Open Space Ad Hoc Committee.
I'll make a motion to appoint Paula Bertram to the Open Space Ad Hoc Committee.
And
I don't know if I can second
can I second it?
She can second it.
Okay, I second that.
All right, any discussion? All approved?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Welcome.
And sort of to piggyback onto that, at the last meeting, the board asked, or I think the chair at the time indicated that he felt that it may be appropriate to invite the Open Space Committee to discuss transitioning from an ad hoc committee to a sitting committee, either through discussion with the Board of Selectmen or some other means. I did reach out to the chair of Open Space, and he seemed to indicate that he was happy to continue in the role that they currently have and in the manner in which they're currently promulgated. But he said he'd be happy to come in and have a discussion with the board if they'd like to do that. But he seemed pleased with the way that they are, and he said they're able to operate and do the things that they need to do as an ad hoc committee. So, I guess I would put it back to the board whether you would like to have him come in and have a discussion, or
I think we should perhaps table that for later. I'd like
Okay.
to talk with the Open Space Committee as a member and talk with them and find out what they really feel and then report back before we.
That was exactly what I was going to say. So now that you're appointed to that committee, maybe you can spend some time with them and
Yep.
come back and report back to us
Yep.
on what you think the logical next move would be. All right, so let's move on to minutes approval. This is going to be mostly your guys' game, but 190 Electric Ave.
oh, you weren't here for any of those. We can't approve any of them.
We can't approve
Yeah.
them.
So there's just
We
two
don't have
people
a
as we
quorum.
don't have a quorum to
Yeah,
approve
we
them
don't
all.
have a quorum.
Okay, so we will table all minutes approvals to the next meeting. Let's move on to committee reports. Capital planning, is that
That's Matt.
Matthew? Stormwater is also Matthew. Agriculture is also Matthew. MJTC, the last meeting was canceled, so next meeting will be next month. MRPC,
Next month.
Charter Review Committee.
Public hearing is Wednesday, 7 PM, Town Hall.
The Green Community Task Force,
No report.
no report. And Open Space Ad Hoc, any update, Paula?
Nope.
Okay, so director's items.
So I was asked for an update on town council's progress on 255-6, the cluster bylaw. He is taking a look at it and will have a proposal for the board in the near future.
What does that mean? Does that mean this town meeting or next town meeting?
He knows you want to see it on this town meeting, so he said what he's not going to do is propose a wholesale change, more a strategic alteration to meet the board's goal for
Okay.
what that would do. I think there's a larger conversation on restructuring that at some point in the future, but that's, I think a longer term thing, and I don't think in general the board is concerned about that outside of the singular issue, and he and I discussed some ways that it might be achieved.
Okay.
March 11th is the town caucus, which is why we're meeting next week instead of our normal meeting night of March 11th. And I did forward the DLTA information to everyone.
So I do want to talk briefly about that. One of the things I heard, I attended the selectmen's meeting last week, and one of the things that was discussed was the town facilities and the use of the buildings, and they met with the Open Space Committee. And one of the things that Open Space talked a lot about is walkability and the desire for walkability. And I know numerous communities have taken advantage of DLTA to do walkability studies. So I'm wondering if that's something we want to think about. How we could improve walkability, what improvements we could do. I think it makes sense to at least put it in there, is to do a walkability study of Lunenburg. So I don't know what thoughts are. I know Lancaster just recently did it. I know numerous other communities have done it, to see if there are simple changes we could do to make it more walkable within our community. Because that's what I kept hearing Tuesday night, is walkability, walkability.
Well, and I think in certain areas of town, we've seen a lot of growth that would lend itself to people walking
Exactly.
from one area to another. You look at Emerald Place and the Town Beach and Wallace Park, that whole area. I mean, we have sidewalks in a lot of those areas, but not all. You know, the Town Beach in particular is probably,
It's very, very
you know,
scary.
it's always been
Yep.
congested and the parking isn't great and so on. So, no, I think it makes sense.
So is that something that
And-
we need to vote on, or how does that work? Adam?
Yeah, I would like you to vote on it.
So is that something perhaps we could put on for next week?
Yes, and I'm just trying to figure out which of the categories it would fall into. Because they eligible project activities, planning ahead for housing, planning ahead for growth, supporting community compact, including regionalization, and supporting a housing choice initiative. And I know that in general, the community has been opposed to the housing choice initiative work that the legislature has done. But I don't think that this would fall under
It
that.
might be under the UPWP, the Unified Planning Work Program.
But that would be UPWP, not DLTA funds.
Okay, but
Well, and yes, again, that's a different advocacy.
Yeah,
and
I'd have to look at it, and, you know, we could talk with Brad Harris relative to, or Sherry Bean, as to what bucket we can
Right.
take from, but I know for a fact that several communities did.
Oh, I know we
So-
can totally get walkability assessments done through them. I just don't think it's through DLTA.
Okay, so could you just maybe find out from them?
Yep.
What the timelines are and whether or not we can put something in for this year and put it on for our next meeting? So what are the categories, Adam? I haven't had a chance to look at it since.
Planning ahead for housing. Planning ahead for growth, which is essentially economic development-y sort of stuff. Supporting the community compact and supporting the housing choice initiative.
So maybe we could put that as an item for the next Monday as well, that just a DLTA, to see if we specifically want to act on any of those or submit anything. I apologize, I just haven't had a chance to go in depth on it.
And I think it might be due around the next meeting.
Okay.
So, you know, planning ahead for growth is identifying priority development and priority preservation areas at the local and regional level, including discussion of specific areas of multifamily housing growth. Supporting prompt and predictable permitting using 43D, which is the expedited permitting pad-ready development. Encouraging communities to do the economic development self-assessment tool.
Well, you know, personally, I mean, we keep talking about economic development, and we used the DLTA grant to have an economic development component written, which we never looked at. So, I mean, I think it makes sense for us to go back and at least relook at what MRPC did, which we haven't done. So maybe it's possible to send that out. And I know we've talked about funding for the master plan, but to me, this work's been done and we haven't even really reviewed it. So maybe we review it and we say, okay, we need a complete overhaul of it, but at least I'd like to revisit it. And if we talk about an economic development tool, I don't know what that means, but I've attended a lot of economic development summits, and the biggest thing is marketing yourselves as a community to encourage economic development, which we haven't really done. So I think
the self-assessment, it's EDSAT, and if it's the one, I believe it was developed by Barry Bluestone, and it's functionally you go through and you rank yourself on how you do at things, and you see where you fall on a scale, and so it determines how you're doing for economic development in areas where you may be able to improve. It's a limited funding to $500 for that tool from MRPC, and the community would pick up any additional costs. So it's a little bit different than most of the other DLTA. what I believe it does is it just gives you the original assessment. It doesn't do any of the deep dive stuff. That would be up to the community to take on if they chose to. I can research that a little further.
Yeah, if you could just find out exactly what they're offering. I think.
In terms of MRPC, I know that they do have consultants that are authorized to do the work instead of MRPC. And I don't mean to disparage them in any way, but a lot of the meetings I've attended have talked about mismanagement of community block grants and mismanagement of funds and over-invoicing for things, and I'm not sure that I would feel comfortable having Lunenburg use them for a lot of this stuff. They've made a lot of changes and a lot of improvements to try to right the ship, but they've had their fair share of issues. And so before we get too involved in using them specifically for some of this work, I think we should at least have reason for pause with it.
I guess I'm a little bit taken aback by that comment. I mean, I think that being a member of MRPC entitles us to a lot of services that, quite frankly, I don't think we as a community take full advantage of, that don't cost us anything. And so DLTA funds are available through state. It's not something we pay for, and it's services that we can get that we may not have to additionally outsource. And it's still funded by the taxpayers, and I think we funded an economic development study that we haven't even looked at. So when we talk about mismanagement, to me, that's mismanagement by Lunenburg. The fact that we haven't even looked at it.
Yep.
So I would caution you on saying, I've attended a lot of MRPC meetings, and I've attended a lot of from transportation as well as from trails, and I think that there's a lot of strides being made in making MRPC more available, really trying to do some outreach to communities and really trying to improve their services. And I think we at least have to look at it, and it eliminates the cost to the town. So I just...
Well, their funds come from the taxpayer, and I'm
Exactly.
just saying simply, whether it's Lunenburg's money or the state's money, if an organization, any organization, is granted funds and mismanages it, that's reason for pause. I don't care if it's coming out of Lunenburg's pockets or somebody else's.
Okay, I think that that's a really strong allegation to be making in a public hearing. I think we're talking about a fund that's available to communities to have local technical assistance done at no cost to the community. Yes, it comes from the taxpayers, but through MRPC and through the TIP process, the town of Lunenburg is receiving $11 million for the Summer Street improvement project. So, as well as for Chase Road. So we've been very fortunate by becoming more involved in MRPC and by building that alliance and building that relationship to take advantage of funding that would not otherwise be available. And all I'm saying is other communities are taking advantage of it, which leads itself to TIP improvements. For example, the walkability study that Lancaster did then led to a substantial TIP project that is in the millions of dollars, which they would not have achieved had they not taken advantages of some of those other services. So I'm not sure where you're going with this mismanagement of funds.
I'll bring documentation to the next meeting, Paula.
I just think that we have an opportunity to if we have services that we know we need, and we're hearing from open space that walkability is an issue, in my opinion, doing a walkability study at no cost to Lunenburg taxpayers, other than funds that have already been, rather than them being allocated to another community to take advantage of that, makes sense.
I think there's also two pots of money, and there's two sections at MRPC. There's transportation and there's community development.
Right.
And I think that they're operated separately, and I think that there may be some distinct operational differences.
But there is absolutely an overlap as well.
There is, yes.
We have a public comment on this topic. I'd like to allow him a chance to speak.
Hi, thank you. Dan Proctor, 1529 Mass Ave. I'm not sure really where Mr. Cole is going, but I can tell you I've had some relationships with MRPC, and they have not been great as far as transparency. Bids for septic jobs specifically, bid openings are, whatever, February 11th at 11 o'clock, not able to make the bid openings, email their office, could we have the results for the bid openings? Yes, we'll get you those. Wait a week later, can I have the bid results for, such and such a grant? Yeah, we'll get those to you, never get them.
Okay.
Numerous times. So again, I'm not sure really what his, comment is about, but I just think credibility, transparency, that type of thing is important.
All right, thank you for sharing that.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so you'll look into that for the next
I'll look into
meeting?
that and I'll have information for you for next week.
All right, and you're going to bring some information to share with us as well?
Yeah, I'll bring all the details. Not really looking to go down that path, but
Well, it just,
I'd like to
it might
see-
be
no, I'd
useful
like to see
information
them.
to share with the
Yeah,
board.
it's
Because we do
definitely
participate in
information to
these
have.
committees.
Yeah. And I'd like to bring it up.
And if
as
you'd
a
like to get
member
it to
of
me,
the-
I can distribute it beforehand.
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, cool. So that covers our director's items. Notices and communications, I think everybody
Everything scanned to you?
It all stand. Our meeting schedule, all board meetings are held at Town Hall at 6:30 PM unless otherwise indicated. Our next meeting is March 4th, where we're continuing the 400 Electric Avenue and the
190 Electric
190 Electric Avenue. And
In the public hearing.
And the public
and the
hearing.
public hearing. Then March 25th, it looks like we don't have anything scheduled yet.
Not as of yet.
Okay, boy, be a quick one.
I heard Paula wasn't going to be here, so.
No, I'll be here for the 25th.
Oh, you'll be here for the 25th.
I won't be here for the first meeting.
So
Okay.
I would get everything scheduled into the 25th.
See what I can do.
Paula could turn into a
I-
pumpkin after
I thought you had
Yeah.
said that you weren't going to be here.
No, I won't be here the
Okay.
meeting of the.
That gives
April
everybody a
1st.
little bit of breathing room.
Yep.
Okay, so it looks like we have our paperwork here.
Yes, we do.
So we can return from recess and reopen 380-400 Electric Avenue.
Yes, all right.
And apologize for the interruption. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
For making these copies. I really appreciate it.
Excuse me, so yes, the board has now received copies of the February 22nd, 2019 review letter from Graves Engineering. I had reached out to Jeff from Graves to discuss the comments, but in general, as the board will see as they flip through, they have accepted our comments. The first one with any sort of edit required would be comment 12, which was just a labeling of clarification on the temporary versus permanent sewer easements that run through the property. And if need be, I can point that out back on the exhibit plan that I have.
So is the label corrected?
The label is corrected on my copy. I sent him, and I believe I copied Adam with kind of red lines of what the changes would be.
Okay, so you received those changes?
I did.
Okay.
The next comment that required response from Descharmandillis from myself was comment 34 with regard to spot elevations at the handicap accessible spaces. I clarified those spot elevations and slopes, and I'm providing grading with less than 2% slope in all directions at those spaces. The contour itself was correct, the spot elevation was off.
So the contour was fine the way it was? It was
Yep,
just-
Okay, so the
was just
contour.
a- it
The
was just a
contour was off, I had a
documentation.
spot elevation label that was incorrect, and I
Okay.
cleaned that up and I sent that to him. The 35 had a bottom elevation on the underground detention system as 495 even. That was corrected to 499 and a half.
So it's been corrected to 499.5.
It has been corrected, and I can submit finalized revised plans to the board.
So you have not submitted the.
I have not,
No, he responded to Mr. Walsh, and he CC'd me through PDF
But you
plans.
corrected that on the plan.
I've
already.
corrected that on my copy of the plans. I need to distribute final revised plans to the board and to Mr. Walsh.
Okay.
Okay, great.
But these, I sent red lines to him of what the change would be.
Okay.
Comment 36 requires, I'm adding a note to the plans saying that the existing drain line that runs through the property from the Trenke site, that remains operational.
Okay. And so that's a note that you're adding to the.
Correct.
That you added to the plan?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the only other comments were the two new comments with regard to the MDC trap sand oil separator that'll be servicing the garage. I'm just putting the plans back up here now. That was not on the original plan, but based on feedback from the sewer commission, we added an MDC oil water separator in front of the garage building to collect the floor drains. It's the exact same as what's servicing the car wash. Same detail, same construction. The next comment in the review letter was with regard to how I was connecting it into the sewer.
Mm-hmm.
I have no issue with making it a Y connection on the service like this instead of going directly into the manhole. So all of his outstanding comments, I'm in the process of addressing, and they were relatively minor.
Okay, and so those updated plans will then be submitted?
Yes.
Okay, great.
The only outstanding comment, I believe, from the board that wasn't covered in the Graves letter was with regard to the architecturals, which we had submitted with this last set of plans. This was what I'm showing here now is the elevation drawing for the relocated building. And I also have underneath, and you also have copies of this in your package. And underneath this is the elevations of the proposed Morton building. As I made this difficult on myself to show you. No, just pull this one back. So this is the elevation views of the proposed Morton building. South elevation is the front. The MDC trap would be in front of the building here. This is the west elevation with one garage and the entrance. The north elevation is the rear of the building. And then this east elevation is the side that faces Electric Avenue.
Procedurally on this, I know he indicated that he's working on the revised plans that will be sent to Graves and to the board.
Mm-hmm.
Do we need to wait for those plans before we take action, or can we take
That's
action?
up to the board. I think that the outstanding issues are minor in nature.
Okay.
And if the board wished to proceed with voting on the project.
Oh, we
and
can't, because we don't have four,
You can.
right?
You
We
you only
can?
need 3 because this is a site plan approval, not a special
Okay.
permit.
Okay, okay.
So if you chose to move towards approval, you could add a condition that a final letter from Graves be issued acknowledging all the outstanding issues were satisfied.
Okay.
And that would be acceptable. If they were more substantial issues, you could still do that, but I would generally advise you not to. Where this is a lot of housekeeping note issue and, a Y connection versus a 90-degree connection is, not substantial. It's more of a practical matter. You certainly could move forward with approval if the board felt that that was what they wanted to do.
I just had a couple of questions. Graves commented on signage, and there's no
Did
plan
Graves
for
comment on
signage.
Just saying that it would need further
I'm just
action.
looking at the distance of the building from the street, and if it was me, I'd want a sign closer to the road. And so,
Hi, Jean Proctor, 1529 Mass Ave. We are in the process of working on a sign, but
Okay.
yes, through zoning, we were approved to place it just off the property line. So even with the Whale and Wash sign,
okay.
we may opt to bring it back just a little bit because we don't want to have one sign obstruct another
The
sign.
other, yep.
And we don't know the developer where his placement of his sign is too, so we want to
Yep.
make sure that it's clearly,
So
clear
this-
signage showing the back of where the property is,
Okay.
where our businesses are.
So the signage that's there now will be removed?
It will
because
have to
that's
be
gonna be on
moved.
the other
That's
lot.
correct. That's
And then-
correct.
So.
So
and
we're in the process of,
Figuring it out.
yes,
So you
I'm-
don't know where you're going to place it currently?
it's marked on there, actually. So we have
Is it on the plan?
it should be.
Because the signage would come through us unless they need a dimensional variation.
And we
Well,
don't, and
they've
we
got a
don't.
And then they-
dimensional
We do
variation,
already.
but
Okay.
the bylaw does say that anything larger than 36 square feet.
And it will not be.
Or maybe that's not the,
It is
No.
36.
is it,
It is.
requires the planning board to
And it
approve?
won't be.
Okay. It
Well-
does require the placement of freestanding signs by site plan approval.
Exactly.
And I think there's, well,
Oh, okay.
if you know where it is, or if did I,
It is on the
that
plan.
box is, okay. The small box on the island between the car wash and the driveway, between the two catch basins. I just didn't see any note that said
It
sign.
doesn't say what
This
it is.
box?
No.
No.
This box?
Yes.
Oh, that's the sign.
So if you do, so to Mr. Cole's point, it's on the plan. They may ask that you, in your plan revisions, add a note saying sign location, and that way it would be, noted. If you do change it, if you pull it back, we do have a de minimis change within our regulations that doesn't require reopening the public hearing, requires just a red line plan on a letter. The board can do it administratively. So if you're still sort of wiggling on that, you have that option to do that administratively through the board. And I certainly don't want to speak for the board, but I think in general, the board has been willing to entertain those on things that pull stuff away from the street as opposed to pushing it towards the street, so.
Right, we know that we won't go any closer to the street from where it is on the plan. Once we move the red building back,
You have a better
we'll
idea
have
of
a
what
better
you're looking
idea
at.
of what we're, and we certainly don't want to place it in a spot where we're not going to be pleased with it.
Okay.
Does that answer that question?
So, and anything under 36 square feet, they don't need full review.
12 square feet and under, they can just do.
Do.
Anything between 12 and 36, they need site plan approval to install it.
Because it's freestanding.
Correct.
Correct. All right.
And this is a reuse of the existing sign. So it's not a new sign being brought to the site.
Right.
That's correct. We might revise it a little bit, but it certainly won't be any more than it is now.
And I don't think that's bigger than 36 square feet.
It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
So-
what it looks like.
Be fine.
It just, we're just, we have 3 businesses back away from the street once we do all this.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that the sign is, it
Reflective
shows
of
that,
that,
certainly. So right now, it's Proctor Landscape and Masonry Supply. But
And the board's generally unconcerned with the content, more the location and the size.
Sure.
So this location that's shown on this plan, is this based on the variance that was granted, or?
Yes, yes it is.
Okay.
Okay.
And the landscape supply and the car wash are the same parcel, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Based on the
So-
A&R the board signed.
How does that work where you have a existing sign? Are you allowed more than one sign on the same lot?
I believe that was covered with their zoning board approvals, because I know that the driveways were discussed and covered, and I think that the signs were as well as part of the pre-existing stuff. I'll review that, but I'm,
Any other questions?
No?
Are there any questions from the public or comments from the public? Does
I
not
think
appear
we
to
just
be.
want to make sure the applicant's aware that they need a unanimous vote in this situation. So that's up to them.
Yeah, so
Yeah, so we're down a person right now. You need 3 positive votes to approve. And there are 3 people here, which means tonight you would need a unanimous vote. If you wanted to continue to our next meeting, then we would have 4 participants at the meeting. You still just would need 3 votes, but you'd have 4 participants.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can close the public hearing and take a vote now, or we can continue it to next week, and we can leave
you could
that up.
also close the public hearing and still vote next week. If
Oh, we could.
that was what you wished.
That would be an option too. But I'd like to let
Okay.
you decide what you would like to do.
So is this kind of like I pick either from window number 1 or 2?
Would you like what's behind door number 1, door number 2,
Can I
or
get
door
any
number
insight
3?
on how the board
I-
feels?
I will-
Etzel.
I will tell you, I have no problems with it.
Okay, I mean, I really, the changes, obviously, we know the site guy who's gonna be doing the work, whether I have to put a Y in or I'm going right into a manhole, the site is gonna be built the right way. I really hope that the board understands we're trying to do the right thing on this property.
Would it be appropriate for us to just do a straw poll?
I don't see why you can't.
You can, yeah.
So why don't we just do a brief straw poll on this? I would vote to approve this.
So would I.
So would I.
Excellent, so I would like to vote tonight then.
Okay, then I would accept a motion to close the public hearing.
I would make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, so as part of deliberations, the board needs to consider any potential conditions you would like to impose.
So we have those documented standard conditions now, right?
The board has never,
That we said,
We can
I remember at a previous meeting, we came up with a nice set of conditions, and I said, can we make these our standard set of conditions?
Yes, we did.
we did.
We did.
So I'd like to apply that standard set of conditions, because that already outlines the times and all of that. And I think that's a good set that we should stick to. It's in the same exact area as the last project where we adopted that set of standards.
Which project was that? Was that Unitil or was
I think it was the Unitil project. It was either Unitil or the car wash,
Okay.
one or the other.
Yeah, but we specifically talked about having a template for a standard set of conditions that we would use moving forward. So the only stipulation that I would have is that we receive a letter from Graves Engineering stating that all of the outstanding issues have been addressed to his satisfaction.
I'd like to also add a request that we just add a comment on the plan, that box is indeed the sign,
Yes.
so it's clear to everybody reading the plan. Are there any other conditions other than standard in the 2 we've just mentioned?
No.
Okay, then I'd accept the motion to approve.
So moved?
Any second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and moving right along, we get to fast forward for the whole bunch of stuff and move on to ongoing items.
So we already touched on cluster development.
We did.
I think as we roll into April, we'll start talking about either solar energy or off-street parking and loading, as well as earth removal. I am almost done with the earth removal draft back to you folks, so I should have it out probably Monday at the latest. Economic development, maybe this summer we can start to review, or after town meeting we can start to review that draft per Paula's request. And then the master plan, depending on what happens at town meeting, we can start to look at what that looks like.
Okay. Any questions on ongoing items? All right. I'd like to open up for any last public comment.
Hold
sorry.
on. I thought we had.
That comes after public comment.
Okay, sorry. I lost my agenda, but.
I'll share mine.
Just Ken took it.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comment? No? Okay. Then I'll move on to board comments and concerns.
So I want to talk about the town building reuse. There was a meeting of the Board of Selectmen on Tuesday night that I mentioned last week with the Parks Commission, and members of Conservation were invited to attend as well, but they were not in attendance. We had received a communication relative to the meeting. I wasn't aware that the planning board really wasn't intended to attend that meeting, but we had received an agenda and a notice about the meeting. So I came thinking the planning board was in attendance. The chairman was there, Matt Allison was in attendance as a member of the audience, and I did actually speak. Looking at Mass General Law, the planning of the community, such as in the master plan, is under the jurisdiction of the planning board. And the use of facilities and relative to parks, a lot of the conversation talked about whether it was appropriate, where parks should be, what was appropriate for parks. We talked about open space, about their need for open space and where it is, and in relationship to the buildings and what they thought the best use of the buildings were. And it was a great discussion. It was just a general discussion. But my issue or concern is that I believe the planning board should be involved in that discussion as well. And I'm curious as to what you guys think. But, we're talking about economic development. We're talking about master planning. The use of our facilities, where town hall is, walkability, how traffic flows, where economic is, what form it takes, is all something that comes under the master plan, which is absolutely under the control and jurisdiction of the planning board. So when we're talking about these kind of things, I don't understand why Conservation and Open Space are meeting with the planning board, with the Board of Selectmen, but yet the planning board is not. I did talk with Adam, and his take on it wasn't a planning issue, and I respectfully, vehemently disagree with that. I think the use of our facilities, the planning of open space, the planning of parks, is certainly a conversation that the planning board should be part of. And so I would like to know.
Interesting, because in the planning board was originally very involved with the
building reuse.
With the building reuse.
Right.
And we had a representative on the building reuse committee. We talked about it at almost every meeting. And then the building reuse proposal was finalized, and then we didn't really end up being able to execute on the recommendations for a variety of reasons. But now we're starting to talk about it again, and you're right. I
We're
don't
not
understand
part of the discussion.
why we aren't in the discussion.
And I can't speak to that. It's been
supposed to be a member of some committee that we didn't get.
No, I think the selectmen have been conducting their approach to the buildings, and they've been inviting these different groups. And I think you mischaracterized what I said a little bit. I think that planning of parks and location in general is part of what the planning board does through the master plan. I think what I said was the discussion the selectmen were having, they invited those folks to talk about the building specifically in relation to the scope of parks and recreation and open space. And that specific micro discussion wasn't necessarily something that fell directly into the planning board's jurisdiction. On a grander scale of, planning everything in general, it would, but I think as a micro of what do these 5 sites have an impact for in this realm, I think it was more geared towards the folks in those. I don't disagree that the planning board would have input on the town buildings, but I don't think that any of these boards or groups that have been meeting with the selectmen on this went and knocked on their door and said, we need to come in and talk about these buildings. The selectmen has sought input from them. And I don't know, again, I certainly don't want to speak for the town manager or the selectmen, whether they felt that because planning was so involved in the original building reuse, that their piece is reflected in the product of that building reuse. Now, I understand the membership has changed, vastly different than it was when building reuse happened. And I certainly think that if the board as a whole, or the whole that's here, feels that it's something that they would like to discuss with the selectmen, I can certainly approach them about that. But I think it's something that the board needs to decide that they would like to do.
And I understand it's something the board needs to talk about, and that's why I brought it up. I just want to point out that open space is currently an ad hoc committee of the planning board. And personally, I found hearing the discussion very informative from a planning board perspective. So I think at a minimum, knowing these conversations are taking place and having the opportunity to hear, because hearing from Parks and Rec, hearing from Conservation, hearing from open space is a critical component of any planning. So I think that at a minimum, being aware that those conversations are taking place so that we can either choose to or not to choose to listen and to be part of those discussions. But I think it's important that we all start communicating together. Because, what was said at that meeting, luckily it was broadcast, and I would urge everybody to take a look at it, because hearing the different perspectives and hearing the viewpoints is important in developing a plan. So personally, I would at a minimum like to talk about it as a board on how we think how we feel about this issue, as well as how we feel about any planning and what our role is.
Was that the last selectmen meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
No. Well, and I think ultimately it's going to boil down to how much cooperation you get. I mean, the Board of Selectmen has put forth numerous articles on warrants going back 3 years now, all with kind of the same theme of conveying land, and we go to town meeting and they get shut down and then it comes back around again. And I can't remember the Board of Selectmen ever reaching out to planning under any circumstance as long as I've been here, which is only a year, but
Is there
to do any
an
of
article for this town meeting?
I believe, and I left, was it the last one? It was. I left before they had concluded, but I believe there's an article for the disposition of the Brooks House, and I believe there's an article for the disposition of the old primary school.
Well, I believe it's important that the planning board takes a stance on an article, and I think we need to discuss it. And I don't know how the others feel, but I believe I would like to hear from the Board of Selectmen as a board, and I think that it's important that we have a discussion. I don't know how everyone else feels, but
Yeah, I mean, the only meeting that I saw referenced a plan of record, but I know of no plan on any record that shows like a clear indication of this is what we're looking to do with these things. The articles, as I understand them, to potentially convey the old primary school and the Brooks House, basically is very similar to other articles where we give the right of conveyance to APDC or the Board of Selectmen, and then it's the ball's in their court. And I think that's a risky move. Theoretically, the board could convey those properties for $1, and I know the APDC is concerned about the historical value of the properties. I think the best way to protect the historical value is to maintain the ownership, because if you convey it to a developer, all he has to do is wait out the 18-month demo delay, and then he bulldozes the building.
Well, within
I
the
think we're getting-
APDC, though, the demo delay is ceded to the APDC, and they can just deny demolition.
So I think we're getting way into the weeds. I think this is an agenda item that
Yep.
needs to be on our agenda.
So I would propose the 25th would be the appropriate time to do that. As the 4th, we have now 3 hearings,
Okay.
and then the 25th would be the next one following that.
Okay, could we at least let the selectmen know that we will be talking about the proposed articles on the March 25th meeting? And if they would like to attend, they are welcome to do so. Or if they would like to speak with the planning board prior to that, they'd have to invite us?
In the past, have we made recommendations on those articles for town meeting? I thought we had.
Not that I can.
I don't believe so. I don't think that the building reuse stuff, the board made any recommendations
It's
on.
interesting, because, I mean, I would think that would cross significantly with planning and beyond just getting a recommendation and not from finance. I would think that you'd want a recommendation from planning as well.
I also have a question. I mean, I expressed my views as a citizen. I mean, I obviously was familiar with the previous articles and previous proposals, and I have my own personal perspective. But if the planning board takes a position, and I just want to understand from my own perspective, if the planning board takes a position on an article, obviously that is relayed to town meeting. But can an individual who, if they don't agree with the recommendation, can they speak as a citizen? How does that work?
You never lose your voice as a citizen.
Okay.
And I think that this is something that all elected officials struggle with.
Okay.
You certainly can avail yourself of the Ethics Commission at the state. That's what they're there for.
Well, it's not an ethical issue, but I'm just wondering if there's a policy or an issue.
I don't believe that there is a local policy, but ethics can give you some guidance
Okay.
on how to separate, because there could be the appearance of impropriety of using your position to boost your signal, so to speak, of what your opposition is. I don't think that's necessarily something that often falls into it, especially if you're taking a position opposite of that of a stated position of your board.
Okay.
But it may be worth it to just call them and have the conversation.
Okay.
To give yourself peace of mind.
I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't
No,
know
no,
what the consensus, but I just want to understand how
yeah,
this plays.
you're always able to speak.
Well, I
on
know
your
as a selectman, we may have voted, and then they would ask what was the vote, and I know I've spoken before,
Yes.
but I just want to make sure that there's not a policy that.
I think the gray
this board
area
has
really
adopted.
comes when you go and speak as a citizen at another board or committee's meeting, and you say something that someone could interpret as the position of the planning board.
Oh, okay.
Whether it
Okay.
is or isn't.
Okay. But if you're speaking as a citizen and you say that.
But you are, but people see you and they know you're on the planning board, and you automatically get, like, if I stood up at town meeting and said, I think this article's stupid
Yeah.
about anything, people are going, oh, that's the guy from the planning board. Whether it has anything to do with the planning board or not. So I'm not saying it's not that you can't do it, it's not that you shouldn't do it, it's just you have to be ready for there's some conflation of who you are and what you're speaking of, no matter if you say I'm speaking as a citizen or not. I mean, it kind of gets into a weird area.
Okay. I definitely think this is something we as a board need to talk about. I think it's something we need to talk about with the selectmen, and how we can facilitate that, I don't know, but I definitely think it's something that needs to be on our agenda on the 25th if we can't do it on the 24th.
On the 4th.
I'm sorry, on the 4th.
We can try and squeeze it in on the 4th. I just...
You know what, can we put it on the agenda, and if
Sure.
we don't have time, we can move it to the 25th.
Cool. All right, any other board comments and concerns? And I'd accept a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Look at that, 8:20.
So you're running again, right, to be chairman?
See, when I run the meetings,